Remember, friends, when I promised to cover The Running Man next?
I lied.
However, as one of my old bosses likes to say, if you're not going to give the audience what you advertised, you'd better give them something better. And luckily, I am giving you a top 5 all-timer from Arnold. Stick around for Predator. Following the contractually obligated, mild success of Raw Deal, Arnold entered his post-Dino De Laurentiis era, finally fulfilling that contract and moving on. He's free, and as his star would rise, so would the script quality, along with his salary. This next 5 years cemented his legacy as a box office behemoth, and it all started right here with Predator. Predator came from 2 first-time writers and longtime brothers, Jim and John Thomas, who basically wondered, what if Alien, but in the jungle? They tweaked that formula slightly to make it an alien coming to Earth to hunt big game, and in this case, the biggest game of all were combat soldiers. The original script was titled Hunter and was rejected by every producer and agent in town, until they quote-unquote slipped it under the door of an executive at 20th Century Fox, which of course is the flowery cover story, but basically an assistant read it and passed it up the chain until it got to Larry Gordon, the president of 20th Century Fox. Nobody actually just slips a script under a door. It ends up having to be read by somebody who then passes it on to somebody else and somebody else. Executive assistants are your friends. Gordon bought the script, and another executive, John Davis, who had worked on Commando, brought the script to Arnold. According to Jim Thomas, the writers met with Arnold in a hot tub. And it wasn't an easy sell. He was very serious, and he wanted to know about the character he was going to play. And if you've been watching this series, you know that is not a surprise. From the beginning, Arnold was trained to care about his characters, their motivations, their dialogue, and then balance those with moments that could easily fit on a poster and a trailer. Something marketable that also had a little bit of depth. The Thomas brothers convinced him by saying Commando, the movie that had just come out at the time, was a lot of fun, but that main character, John Matrix, was introduced like a cartoon, carrying an entire tree. The draw of Predator is that Arnold will have finally met his match against an unstoppable alien. He'll be desperate, crawling through the mud with no weapons and no hope, and somehow find a way to prevail. And that was good enough for Arnold, though the script still needed work. Originally, it was just Arnold versus the Hunter, but Arnold envisioned it as more of a Magnificent Seven ensemble. So they reworked the story to make him the head of a military rescue team who gets dropped in the jungle under false pretenses. Then they get picked off one by something in the jungle. Larry Gordon hired John McTiernan to direct, which was a risk at the time because this was not yet the McTiernan who directed Die Hard. He was a relative unknown who had only just made his first movie in 1986, Nomads, but they liked what they saw, especially on the budget it was done with, and the job was his. In addition to John Davis, there was a little more continuity from Commando. Joel Silver was brought in to produce. Silver was also in the middle of making Lethal Weapon, which is important because it explains a very odd bit of casting. Speaking of which, for Arnold's rescue team, casting director Jackie Birch wanted to surround him with Vietnam veterans, which is how Jesse the Body Ventura joined the movie. Now, obviously, Ventura was known at the time as a wrestler, though he was semi-retired and transitioning to commentary, but he was a legit Navy SEAL and he went to Vietnam. Richard Chavez, who plays Pancho, also did a tour of duty in Vietnam, and then the rest of the team, while not veterans, it's full of heavy hitters. Bill Duke, who we know from Commando, came on to play Mac. Sonny Landham, who was in 48 Hours, he plays Billy, and apparently frightened the studio so much that they hired bodyguards, not to keep him safe.
The bodyguard was to protect other people from Sonny and make sure that Sonny never misbehaved.
For the role of Dylan, the CIA agent who convinces Arnold to take the mission, they cast Apollo Creed himself, Carl Weathers. And so you look at this team, it is an overload of testosterone. You've got Mr. Olympia, 2 Vietnam vets, a man who is a danger to those around him, Action Jackson, badass Bill Duke, and this guy. Who is this guy? Well, that is Shane Black. You may know that, but if you don't, he is not an actor. He is a screenwriter. How did he end up here? Well, remember when I said Joel Silver was producing Lethal Weapon? Well, that was Shane's first script, and Silver brought him on Predator under the auspices that they could work on Lethal Weapon while making Predator. But the real reason was that they were also secretly hoping he would do rewrites on Predator as well. We'll see how that turned out shortly. By all accounts, production was extremely difficult. When they flew to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, the actors went through an intense boot camp by military advisor Gary Goldman, and he even said even these Vietnam vets were struggling. The heat was stifling. Richard Chavez was bitten by hundreds of ants. There was no level ground during filming. John McTiernan broke his wrist at one point, and since it was the middle of summer, the jungle was completely burned out and brown. They had a complete nursery, so they could add plants and trees to every shot, and even something called a leaf crew, whose only job was to spread the jungle floor with nice-looking leaves. A bunch of pranks were also played. Arnold talked the wardrobe into telling Jesse Ventura his arms were 2 inches bigger than Arnold's.
That made Jesse Ventura feel pretty good.
So then later, when they would measure them in a bet, Jesse would end up losing.
Then we measured it and my arm was 3 inches bigger than his.
Maria Shriver came to visit once, and they filled her shower with frogs. Speaking of Maria, another thing that happened is that Arnold and Maria were getting married in the middle of Predator's production. So he literally flew out on a Friday for the rehearsal dinner, got married on Saturday, had a 2-day honeymoon, and was back on set by Wednesday. Meanwhile, the studio was concerned. They were 48 days into the shoot, and less than half of the movie had been shot. And then there was the matter of the Predator itself. The design of the Predator by Boss Film Studios was lanky and insect-like, and required an actor who was lithe and agile to move quickly through the jungle. Enter Jean-Claude Van Damme. Yes, that's right. The Muscles from Brussels started his career as a mammalian dressed as an alien. Now, his career was just a couple years from Bloodsport, so this was a big deal for him. The first suit that showed up was bright red because they were shooting the mats for the camouflage effect. It looked absurd, but they knew it wouldn't be in the movie. And then the real suit showed up, and it looked like this.
One ugly motherfucker.
Unfortunately, they were in the middle of the jungle and they didn't have any other options. So they started shooting with Jean-Claude in the suit. And there are literally 7 different versions of what happened next. One story is that Jean-Claude kept passing out in the red suit and was fired because he couldn't stay conscious. Another was that Jean-Claude hated the suit because his face wasn't on camera, so he complained the whole time and then he was fired. That's how Arnold remembers it. Jean-Claude Van Damme was a relentless complainer. Or maybe the story about how he got mad at Joel Silver, took off the $20,000 head, and broke it on the ground is true. My favorite version is that Jean-Claude was making the Predator kickbox, and Joel Silver told him, the Predator is not a kickboxer. Jean-Claude said that's how he sees the Predator, and so he must do it, and so he got fired. I mean, God, I hope that's the true one. According to Jean-Claude Van Damme himself.
So I was on some sorts of...
like stilts?
Yeah, so when Joel asked me to jump, I knew it was going to be a bad one. I said, this is impossible, Joel. I think we're going to have a problem. Then he replaced me by somebody. And the guy who did my stunt, something bad happened to him. And then they stopped the film and they did a new, more safe outfit.
It's probably a combination of all those things, but the bottom line was the suit was garbage. Everybody knew it. So they sent the footage back to the studio and said, we need to shut this shit down. This cannot be in the movie. This was a bit of a risk because the studio could have just scrapped the whole movie at this point. They weren't loving what they were seeing, but they eventually agreed and production was shut down while they figured out what to do next. Luckily, Arnold Schwarzenegger came to the rescue. He happened to know someone, the great Stan Winston, who created the Terminator design. Stan agreed to $1.5 million, and he and his team got to work with a little help from none other than James Cameron. While on a flight with James Cameron, Stan was working on the design, and Cameron said, you know, I've always wanted to see something with mandibles. And Stan was like, oh, you mean something like this? And the Predator as we know it was born. Learning from the Jean-Claude debacle, they designed the creature so a performer could move around unfettered, which seems low-tech and cheap, but according to Winston, as long as it doesn't look like a man in a suit, it doesn't matter if that's the technology that got you there. With the new suit, they needed a new actor, so they hired 7'4" Kevin Peter Hall, who had just played Harry in Harry and the Hendersons. In total, production was shut down for 8 months. That's enough time for Arnold to go shoot a completely different movie altogether, which he did. And that movie is called The Running Man. And that's why I was confused at the end of last episode, because The Running Man was technically finished before Predator. It created a conflict when it came time to release the movies. They were both supposed to come out in the summer of 1987, but Arnold negotiated to get The Running Man released later in the year. He must have seen both movies and said, yeah, let's go with this one. The only thing at this point that was missing from The Predator was what it would sound like. For that, they hired none other than Optimus Prime himself, Peter Cullen, to figure it out. Here's where he found inspiration.
I saw this ugly, ugly face and these tentacles like going like this. And it reminded me of a upside down horseshoe crab dying in the sun on a beach when I was a kid. From that horseshoe crab was coming all this crackling sounds, bubbles coming out that were bursting, you know. I could remember it. So I don't know if I can do them now, but I thought, okay.
For the score, they hired Alan Silvestri, who's given us some of the most iconic scores in history, from Back to the Future, to The Avengers, to Mac and Me. Can't all be winners. But the Predator score was great. Predator opens with a spaceship making a drop-off to Earth, and I've always wondered what the movie would be like without that shot, giving away the sci-fi aspect of it. I mean, obviously the trailers and the materials would give it away, but would it have been more interesting if we didn't know about the Predator until minute 15? I don't know. Then we meet Arnold's Dutch Schaefer chomping a cigar and wearing a red polo shirt and... wait a second. I've seen that red polo before.
Ah, it's wonderful and cooperative of you to come over.
My God, people. Is that the same character? Is The Long Goodbye part of the Predator cinematic universe? You want to course correct the Predator franchise? You get Elliot Gould on the phone, you pay him as much money as you need to, and you just have him be a smartass to the Predator for an hour and a half. Gould is gold. Now, Schaefer has been called in by his old CIA buddy Dylan. They tip us off to what kind of person Dylan is right off the bat.
You son of a bitch.
And then we're treated to the manliest handshake ever that spawned a million memes.
Bitch.
Dylan and this knockoff general from Commando. Supposedly the actor who played the Commando general was offered the part, but didn't want to be typecast, so they just got this guy instead. They explain the cabinet minister has been captured in Central America and needs rescuing. Dylan wonders why Dutch passed on Libya, and Dutch explains,
"We a rescue team, not assassins."
And Dylan gives this little look to the general that'll be important later, because every shot in this movie serves a purpose, and Dutch agrees to the mission, and we're off. And that is it. That is all the setup you need. In the chopper, we're introduced to Dutch's team, and it's an efficient showcase for each character. They got Long Tall Sally playing on the boombox. Blaine, played by Jesse Ventura, takes a big slug of chewing tobacco. Dylan may have a connection to Dutch, but he is not part of the group, which Blaine makes blatantly clear.
It's a real nasty habit you got there.
Hawkins tells a raunchy joke. Billy doesn't laugh at it. It seems like a throwaway, but it's setting up something for later. Mac is shaving. It's just another mission for him. So, these are all just little moments within this 3-minute sequence that set up who these guys are and how they'll react to different situations. Now, they land in the jungle and come across a downed helicopter of Green Berets. It's the first indication that this mission may not be what Dylan claimed. It gets worse when they come across the bodies that have been completely skinned. For now, they blame the guerrillas, so they track them down to this palapa. And it is a hell of a sequence. It starts out pretty stealth with a whistle and a stab, but then it just ends in a rain of gunfire and explosions. Blaine unleashes a goddamn helicopter Gatling minigun, for God's sakes. The guns in this movie are all so stupid and impractical, and I love it. Arnold's gun, they just took a gun and a grenade launcher and they were like, what if this was a thing? Arnold's buddy Sven Ole Thorsen shows up once again to get shot and killed. Jesse Ventura finds the title of his memoir.
You're hit. You're bleeding, man.
I ain't got time to bleed.
Arnold drops his first one-liner of the movie.
Stick around.
Which he apparently improvised when they got the knife and it was entirely too big for him to carry around the whole movie. So they're like, I don't know, we'll just kill a guy with it and then you say something cool. But he could have also been thinking about Sam Wanamaker from Raw Deal.
You! Stick around.
And then Dylan's true intentions are revealed. This was not a rescue mission. They were trying to stop an invasion. The Green Berets they found were the first team sent in, but they didn't make it, so Dutch and his crew were sent next.
You're an asset. An expendable asset. And I used you to get the job done. Got it?
They take on a survivor here and head out to the extraction point. And then we're reminded that this is a movie about an alien. We learn that the Predator's mask helps it detect heat, and it can also record and mimic voices. And here's where the Hawkins character trait of telling jokes has a payoff, because Billy finally laughs at one of his jokes, and the Predator can record that and mimic it later to great effect. It's also the first time Billy starts to sense something isn't quite right. Now, remember when I said Shane Black was hired in hopes that he would rewrite parts of Predator? Apparently, the only parts he rewrote were his character's jokes.
Because of the echo.
According to producer John Davis, we asked him to do a rewrite, and he said he was an actor in the movie and not a writer. So, he was the first person we killed. He got killed 7 minutes into the movie, which is a funny story, but it's not entirely true. They didn't restructure the movie after finding out he wasn't going to do rewrites and kill him. He also gets killed like 24 minutes into the movie, not 7. It is funny, though, that Shane refused to do rewrites. Like, dude, you think you were hired for your acting talents? But he is the first victim of the Predator, and in pretty quick succession, Blaine goes down too.
Oh, Painless is waiting.
This leads to a hilarious scene where Mac, in a rage, picks up Blaine's minigun and just starts annihilating the forest. Everyone else joins in and just starts blasting away. John McTiernan claims this is a commentary on the impotence of all the guns, but I'm having a hard time seeing his point through the super awesome hail of bullets and explosions and spent shells. Especially since the sequence before showed how guns were not impotent and killed like a bunch of people. Max says goodbye to his friend Blaine, and this is when he starts to lose his shit. And he is just so good and so incredibly sweaty. Bill Duke is the man. That night, something infiltrates their camp, and Mac goes hog wild, stabbing what turns out to be a wild hog. Now, this is a movie where they say stuff like, "Major, you need to come take a look at this." And they come take a look, and Blaine's body is gone. The Predator has taken it as a trophy, and we finally get our first look here at the Predator as it sutures up a wound. Turns out all that gunfire did actually graze him. The remaining team members start to figure out what's happening, and the next 10 minutes are full of great moment after great moment. Dutch figures out the alien is killing them one by one, and Billy says,
Like a hunter.
Clearly they shot that before they changed the name of the movie. Billy also reveals that he's scared.
Billy, you know something. What is it?
I'm scared, Pancho.
And if Billy's scared, you know something's seriously wrong.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
I also love the way he says,
We're all gonna die.
Dutch forces the survivor Anna to speak English, and she reveals that she found some of its blood on a leaf, leading to the classic line,
If it bleeds, we can kill it.
So they set off on a trap building montage, Home Alone style, even though Home Alone was after this, so we should be calling these Predator style. And for me, it's the little moments that make this movie, like when they're waiting for the Predator and Max shaves himself so hard that he cuts his face. Again, that was established in the chopper. Also, a line I never clocked before, but I laughed out loud this time, was when Dylan said,
So what are you gonna try next, Cheese?
Dutch steps out in the open to try and lure the Predator in, and it works. It gets trapped, but escapes, and Mac gives chase. At this point, Mac is broken, stumbling up the side of the hill, singing Long Tall Sally like a maniac.
I'm gonna have me some fun. I'm gonna have me some fun. I'm gonna have me some fun.
He's joined by Dylan, who suddenly grows a conscience and wants to go after the Predator, even though minutes earlier, all he wanted to do was get the hell out of there.
The rendezvous is 10 to 12 miles away from here. You think the chopper's gonna wait?
That's the only moment that doesn't ring true for me in this movie, but it's an excuse to funnel him towards the Predator, and both Mac and Dylan are outmatched. Carl Weathers gets a badass send-off, then Billy decides he wants an even more badass send-off, and cuts himself to lure the Predator in for a good old-fashioned knife fight. Off camera, Billy does not win, and then we get Arnold's classic line,
Go! Get to the chopper!
Which I'm sure was never intended to be iconic. It's just all in his delivery, and I feel like that's how a lot of his lines end up. I'll be back was not originally intended to be something so incredible. It just took on a life of its own. It was built as a joke, though. This is literally just a line. Arnold has said this is one of his favorites, and that's so funny to me. It's not a pun, it's not a witty retort, or even a kick-ass hero moment. It's just a dude in a panic giving a command. But again, that's the power of Arnold. He can take a mundane phrase, like "I'll be back," or "get to the chopper," and make it iconic. Then we head into the final 20 minutes, which is largely dialogue-free. Dutch slips down a hill into a lake, ends up covered in mud. He inadvertently learns that the Predator can't see him when he's covered in mud, and suddenly he sees an opening.
He couldn't see me.
And this is when the Predator becomes the prey. We get a second Predator-style trap-setting montage. Dutch lights this torch, lets out a primal scream, and it's on. He tries to lure the Predator in and starts to chip away at him with homemade arrows and a spear, but the tables turn again when Dutch falls in some water and gets trapped by the Predator. And here we see Arnold, for the first time in his film career, facing an adversary who is bigger and stronger. It accomplishes the impossible task of making Arnold Schwarzenegger seem like he's in peril. The Predator examines his head and is impressed. Oh, he doesn't have one like this for his collection, so he decides Dutch is worthy of hand-to-hand combat. It's implied that the Predator is hunting these guys for sport, but I wonder if he's just like a nerdy collector of weird knickknacks, and all the other Predators make fun of him. Like, oh, look everybody, Chet's back and he's got more human skulls. What do you do with those things anyway, dude? Just put them on a shelf in your cave and stare at them all day? You know all the lady Predators think you're a weirdo, right? Fucking Predator nerd. Back to the fight. Once Chet drops his helmet, we get another Arnold classic.
You're one ugly motherfucker.
And the two duke it out with the Predator clearly having the upper hand. Dutch tries to lure him into a trap one more time, and we get my personal favorite moment of the movie when Dutch demands that the Predator come kill him.
Come on. Do it. Do it!
Kill me, I'm here! Kill me!
It doesn't work, but luckily the Predator walks into a different trap and gets squished. Dutch asks the Predator,
What the hell are you?
and the Predator responds, which sounds a lot like, but it actually just asks the question back to Dutch. Then it sets off a self-destruct sequence and laughs like Billy. Dutch runs like hell, and boom goes the Predator. Luckily, Dutch survives, but the helicopter pilot is played by Kevin Peter Hall, so he goes from killing the Predator to getting saved by it. Oh, that's nice. Then we get these hilarious end credits, where we get to spend a little more time with our old buddies in nice candid moments where they're all happy, like the ending of a 70s comedy. Reviews for Predator were mixed but leaning positive. Hollywood Reporter said, scriptwriters Jim Thomas and John Thomas have shelled out some sharp, lethal lines. Schwarzenegger, as usual, is at his best delivering dry-humored salvos. When Siskel and Ebert reviewed it, Siskel was having none of it.
Predator stars the muscle man with a smirk, Arnold Schwarzenegger, in a story that is part Rambo and part Alien. And that's a tired mix for me. Pure Rambo, pure boredom, if you ask me. I don't enjoy it. I'm tired of this stuff, and that's all that I'm paid here to say.
But you know Ebert came correct.
This movie, I think, is better than you're giving it credit for. It is exactly what it is. It is a pure summer action picture.
Yeah.
It is 2 hours of excitement. This looks and sounds right. It feels right. There's a lot of energy in it, and that's what it is. Of course it's a cross between Aliens and Rambo, but so what?
You tell him, Raj. Predator was released on June 12th, 1987, and opened at #1 with $12 million, beating out The Witches of Eastwick. It stayed in theaters all summer and ended its run with $59 million domestic and $38 million international for a total of $98 million against an $18 million budget. A huge hit. It was the 10th highest grossing movie of 1987, and most importantly, Arnold's highest grossing movie at this point in his career. He also commanded a $3 million salary for it. Totally worth it. No more raw deals for Arnold. Predator has such a simple premise, it really shouldn't work. But this is one of those perfect storm movies that needs every element to fall into place to succeed. It had to be this cast with this script and this director and this villain. That's proven when you watch any of the 5 sequels. They're chasing something that cannot be replicated. a little bit of movie magic. And because of that, it holds up exceedingly well on the strength of tons of quotable moments, a memorable villain, and a strong dynamic between the members of Dutch's team. And it works on an emotional level too. Yeah, this is a movie bursting with testosterone, but here's this rescue team sent into the jungle. These guys have been through the shit. And yet, when Billy says he's scared, it humanizes them. When Mac starts shaving the skin off his face and mumble singing Long Tall Sally, I am right there with him. Mac is the best character in the movie, by the way. But they all get moments, and their line readings are so interesting and perfect. It also doesn't get in its own way. It's a tight and lean sci-fi movie. The world building is kept to a minimum, and they don't get bogged down with exposition. Again, we're in the jungle at minute 5 of the movie. The Palapa sequence is at minute 15. After that, the hunt is on and the movie never lets up. Arnold's performance and look matches the snug storytelling. He dropped 25 pounds for the role, and his acting is focused. He's asked to do a lot of emoting with very little dialogue as he puzzles out what's happening with Dylan and eventually the Predator. He just looks so much more comfortable than he was in Raw Deal, probably because this was a more physically demanding role, and as we already know, he thrives in those situations. Conan, Terminator, Commando. According to producers, Arnold would approach them with the script and say, "This line has 4 words, I'm only saying 3. He understood the efficiency the role required and knew his actions would do the talking. A side benefit of that, when he does talk, each line of dialogue takes on greater significance. It's probably why a line like "Get to the chopper" has become iconic, because it's one of the few lines he has in the movie. Arnold is one smart motherfucker. He's also smart because he was asked to return for Predator 2, but there were several problems. The studio wasn't willing to pay McTiernan's new fee after the success of Die Hard the following year. Joel Silver wanted me to do Predator 2, but I told him that the movie would take a major dive. Not only was the director wrong, but the script was wrong too. Nobody wants to see predators running around downtown LA. We already have predators. Gang warfare is killing people all the time. Jeez, Arnold already campaigning for governor. Predator 2 and all the other Predators that followed flopped, and Joel and I never worked together again. I agree that Predator 2 isn't nearly as good as the original, but it does have its charm. Same with Predators, but AVP and its sequel are garbage. And every time there's a new Predator movie, Arnold is asked to be a part of it, and every time he says no. In the case of Shane Black's The Predator, Arnold was open to the idea, but was disappointed that his role in the script wasn't bigger. It's time we accept there will only be one perfect Predator movie. Now, I have a deep affinity for Predator. I was obsessed with it as a kid. It's probably the 3rd Arnold movie I saw after Conan the Destroyer and Red Sonja. I taped it off HBO, and it even had that great HBO intro from the mid-80s. It was also one of those extended long play VHS tapes, so I taped both Predator and Rocky IV onto the same tape. Talk about some peak 80s shit. I would take that tape over to all my friends' houses in the neighborhood, and we would just watch Rocky IV and Predator all day long. It not only solidified my love for the Austrian oak, but it actually set me on the path to becoming a screenwriter, which sounds crazy, but follow me. When I was in the 7th grade, back in 1992, I wrote a Predator script with the intention of making it with my friends in the woods near our house. We never made the movie, but it's definitely the first script I've ever written. I wish I still had it. It would be a really fun artifact to dig up. Oh wait, I do still have it. And before I show it to you, let me tell you, when I saw the cover of this notebook, I laughed so hard. I have not seen this thing in 30 years. So, presenting my 12-year-old self's adaptation of Predator on a Legion of Doom notebook. This is an incredibly prophetic, oddly profound discovery. This wasn't just a notebook. Turns out it was kind of a playbook. It predicted a large majority of my adult life in several ways. First, I was a massive wrestling fan as a kid, and not only did I work for WWE for 7.5 years, I was the lead writer of one of their flagship shows. And through that job, I was lucky enough to meet Arnold and briefly work with him on his Hall of Fame induction at WWE. Not only that, this contains a script that I wrote, right? Screenwriting is my passion. It's my day job. It's my greatest creative gift. And I gotta be honest, I didn't expect to be emotional about uncovering this. Once I saw the cover, the notebook took on this new weight. But it makes me wonder, did I just never grow up? Or was I able to translate the things I loved as a kid into a life full of dreams come true? I'm going to go with the latter because I rarely stop and appreciate the things I've accomplished. This seems like a nice moment to do that. And, I can be hard on myself. I can always question whether I should be accomplishing more or if I'm doing the right thing in the moment. And if you're the same way, take a moment to realize you've probably done a lot more than you think. We are so hard on ourselves sometimes. And the whole point of this series is for me to share my love of Arnold Schwarzenegger and to kind of show what he's influenced in my life. And yeah, it's crazy. Also, I definitely grew up because this script is terrible. It's a half remake, half sequel. And as much as I'd like to read you the whole thing, I won't, because there's a lot of crackling dialogue like, okay, let's find a place to set up camp. Right here is a good place too. All right, let's start. They build the tent. Not bad. That's crazy. You think I would come out here to die? Well, maybe you didn't like your life. Oh shit, god damn it. Oh no, it's a grenade. Let's get out of here. There's also a fake ending where the Predator takes out a can of Pepsi and says, gotta have it. Honestly, I take it back. I want to shoot this script. One last exchange. You're already dead. Not. Obviously, Wayne's World was a big deal at the time. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Bet you didn't expect the episode of Predator to get as deep as this, but there you go. Unbelievable. Let's get to the stats. Acting chops, 8 sharp, focused physical acting. Kill count, 34 for a total of 274. Catchphrase, throw a knife and you'll hit an all-timer one-liner, but I'm going to go with, come on, I'm here, kill me. Here are the updated every Arnold movie ever rankings. You got your cameos. I've already mentioned this is a top 5 Arnold movie, so here's the bottom 6. No change. Number 5, Pumping Iron. Number 4, Conan the Barbarian. Number 3, Commando. Number 2, Predator. And number 1, The Terminator. Next up is one of my personal favorite guilty pleasure Arnold movies that sees him step back into the sci-fi genre to dole out delightfully ham-fisted, on-the-nose, punny one-liners while battling an evil Richard Dawson and yelling "Killian" a lot in a story based on a Richard Bachman novel. It's The Running Man. For real this time.